Welcome to this short episode of Tongue in Cheeks. If your cold-blooded obsession is off the scale, then Tongue in Cheeks is the podcast for you. From the gecko, this podcast is named because many reptiles have a bifurcated or forked tongue, giving the image of the tip of each side of the tongue firmly planted in the respective reptile cheeks. This podcast is meant to be too cheeky, educational, and we may even speak with a forked tongue. We're covering everything cold-blooded by talking to conservationists, scientists, breeders, and other professionals on subjects including cold-blooded animals, bioactive vivariums, import-export, native habitats, travel adventures, investments, and much more. I'm your host, Ray Tripp, and I've been crazy about the cold-blooded since childhood. Join with me as we discuss and learn more about them. I'm rekindling my interest in aquascaping and went out to the aquatic experience in October to see what it looked like nowadays. Aquascaping has changed quite a bit since I was last into it. I'm impressed with what I saw and posted some pictures and videos on Facebook and other social media. By the time I was leaving the conference and riding the subway back to New York City to fly home, I was starting to feel ill. A month later, I was still struggling for air. The doctor gave me different antibiotics the second time around, but I was still struggling around Christmas times, so I definitely had an RI. Sorry I haven't gotten any episodes produced. So let's get this one started. There's a few different meanings of the word dither. When I'm talking about dithers in this podcast, I'm not talking about audio-visual, but actually about fish. The purpose of a dither fish differs depending on what the desired result is. Do you have a fish that hides all the time? Maybe it's doing perfectly well eating the food given, which might give you a glimpse of your fish. But is it really enough to assess their health? Sort of like some of my tarantulas that capture the prey as quickly as possible, only to scurry back to safety in a flash, almost like it teleported there and back. I hardly get a chance to see them, so it's hard to tell how they're doing if I can't examine them. They also hide details of their life history from scientists that study them out in the field. So much of what they do in their life goes unnoticed. If only we could camp out for long periods of time in the field and stare down longingly into their lairs. Since that's not really possible, we could do our best by observing them in captivity. While there's really nothing that can be done about the tarantulas, if you have fish that behave like this, you can add what's known as a dither fish to the tank to work its magic. In the case of a shy fish, adding some schooling fish that will always be out in the open will encourage the shy fish to come out because they're demonstrating that it's safe to go out into the open waters because there's no predators. For example, apistogrammas, also known as rams, which is a dwarf cichlid, really needs a dither fish to bring them out. Researching about your particular species should list one or more species of fish that works as a companion dither fish, if that'd be helpful. I think this can also work in our own lives. I'm appreciative of a fellow salesman that started his own podcast and then was able to encourage and guide me to starting this podcast. So blame it on him. He showed me that it was actually safe not to be reclusive and that it's about time that I share my experiences. Not that I'm done having adventures, mind you. But looking back on 2018, I recorded with the first episode in February, but was still struggling financially to squeeze out the $5 per month that the hosting would cost after taxes, family medical coverage, and child support. Maybe you can relate, but it might be a little bit clearer now why $5 was a big deal back then. It wasn't until I got my sales pipeline built up that I could afford better equipment and have longer episodes which cost more on a monthly basis. Months that I missed out on a commission check would set back my ability to move forward with equipment and software upgrades. I don't use any of my other side hustle money for the podcast because they're not really related except as pertaining to building a lifestyle income. Don't get me wrong, I know I won't make any money with this podcast. Podcast funding is from my paycheck, and the side hustle income is still being directed back into the investments, until they can cash flow enough to replace my paycheck. That's what we all really want, isn't it? To have enough income from outside of our jobs to replace the income from our jobs so we can keep herps full-time. And not just full-time in the reptile business when you're between jobs. Let me tell you, being a full-time reptile dealer, doing imports and exports is rough business. It's a feast and famine business, especially having only one source of income, which meant the animals ate more often than I did back in the 90s. Captive breeding was kind of rare back then, so importing was really the way that you had all the production happening for the income in the business. But after I started producing podcasts this year, I actually started hearing other people's podcasts differently, and I adapted mine, made some changes, and hopefully some good improvements. Let me know if there's anything I can use to improve on. I'm sure there's a list for that longer than old Snake Nick's. One other thing I noticed it did for me was to plan out the episodes in advance for subjects and where I wanted the podcast to go. I had it all written out, but I don't know where the paper went. Perhaps one of my kids decided to draw on it and then discarded it, or maybe I accidentally composted it. So if the episodes seem a little random, they are. I've started many episodes that I haven't finished yet, and I changed the order from which I had planned. I've also been doing a little more research, learning how to use equipment, writing, and editing, which I don't like, and overall just experimenting. I wasn't expecting too much to begin with, but I found out it just doesn't flow out perfectly in one take, and voila, it's done. There's a lot of work that goes into it. One of the things that surprised me was that I have to exaggerate my voice to get points across. Otherwise, my voice sounds flat when recorded. Alright, I guess I wandered out into the open a bit there. The second use of a dither fish can serve for the more aggressive fish in the tank. Cichlids are often the main attraction in many tanks around here. Most cichlids are territorial and drive others away. In their native habitat, there's plenty of room for other fish to escape, but not in the confines of the aquarium. Males can get so aggressive towards females, it'll wear her out so much that she won't be productive and she can even die from it. In comes the dither fish to the rescue. In this case, the dither fish needs to be alert and fast, at least faster than the cichlids, and or it needs to be able to take the excess attention. It's wiser to have more than one dither fish in the tank so the aggression gets spread around. The cichlids may never quit chasing the dither fish around, but the females are likely to get less of the aggression, allowing them to produce young. Depending on what species they are, will depend on who does the parental care once the eggs are laid. More than one female might be appropriate for the species as well. So this could be true for us hobbyists too. No, not in a big love kind of way, but maybe like you, I'm known to randomly and spontaneously start talking about my interest in herps, inverts, and fish without any warning. Maybe you can relate. My new boss keeps pythons, so he understands. At work, we're all gathered around in our own cubicles, tethered to the phone so we can't escape the matrix maze, and if we survive and do a good enough job, we can get paid at the end of the week so we can return and do it again the next week. Round and round we swim, day after day, week after week, year after year, returning to the same old familiar landmarks that do the same routine. The mantra at our job is to just keep swimming. We joke that despite all our rage, we're still just a rat in a cage. I actually sit close to my boss, but I'm also surrounded by high performers that don't always chat much, but it's amazing how much they've learned about herps, inverts, and fish in the last 6 months since I've become a new team member. None of them has taken that first step to owning a special new pet yet, but I'm sure if I keep at it, they will. I'm sure they miss me since I took the holidays off to be with my kids, but my team is similar to a second kind of use for a dither fish. There's enough of them that all my spontaneous talking gets spread around and not concentrated on any one particular individual. To their relief, I also spend most of my lunches doing podcast and marketing research. Despite all of my random interruptions, they stay in the top sales ranks anyway. We get very competitive, but we seem to rotate being the top salesperson of the month. Because we're all driven top performers, personalities can clash, but no major injuries occur. It's almost like keeping different species of cichlids together that can all hold their own ground. There's just enough structure to split up the territories. In return, I've become a dither for some of them as well, with their passions that I had no idea existed, and I haven't converted to their interest either. For example, one guy and I, we just don't seem to see eye to eye that lacrosse sounds like a lot like butterfly hunting. Although he says there's a bear on the field trying to kill you while you're hunting the butterfly. Anyway, this podcast has given me some creative outlet to focus some of my energy into something more productive and fun. I hope you enjoy it as well. What I see for the new year is a variety of subjects being covered, but may follow a little more of a wandering path. I won't be monologuing as much as I have some interviews lined up, which I'm quite excited for, and I'm sure you will be as well. Hopefully they will have better humorous anecdotes about our hobby than I do. If there's any suggestions on topics that should get covered, please let me know and I'll work it in. I've had to switch to new recording software. Audacity is nice for recording just me speaking, like now, but was a disaster when I tried to do an interview on Skype. So I've switched to OBS, which can record on 2 different tracks, both audio and visual, for both of us in the conversation, which I can then post them on YouTube channel I'm creating. Also with the Audacity, I had to reset all the settings every time, and I missed a setting occasionally, which made it sound off when I played it back on the uploaded file, which sounded fine in my computer. I've had to learn editing on my own since my son's brain has gone haywire. There's a huge conflict going on in his brain between the video games and his new discovery of girls. They've been the ruin of many a good man, but I know the right one can make a man more successful than where he was headed in the first place. I hope to find her someday. Anyway, my son hardly has time to help out dear old dad anymore. I understand that it's what it took to break me away from my Dungeons and Dragons and comic book addiction. These were for me what his video games are for him. So if you can't get through to me on Messenger or email for a little while, it might be because the internet accidentally got unplugged, unfortunately, breaking up the teen fortress. We're finally on iTunes platform, by the way, and as well as just about any other podcatcher apps that you use. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review, or leave comments below. Send your suggestions to tongueandcheeks@gmail.com, and I'll try to check them every fortnight at least. Oh, that got his ears to perk up. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and let's have a happy and very prosperous New Year. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tongue and Cheeks. Look forward to electrifying fish interviews coming up, and if you like this episode, I really appreciate you liking the podcast, rating it, and sharing it. If you'd like to help even more, I could still use help with the graphic design, editing, proofreading, and other virtual assistant work. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, shoot me a message. Thanks.